US President Donald Trump announced that the United States will deploy anti-drug Navy ships near Venezuela, a move condemned by the Venezuelan government. A first batch of COVID-19 testing kits arrived in Brazil from China. Meanwhile, the Russian government sent a plane carrying humanitarian aid to the United States this Wednesday. The UK has recorded its biggest daily rise in the number of COVID-19 deaths so far, taking the death toll to over 2,300 on Wednesday. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. US President Donald Trump announced that the United States will deploy anti-drug Navy ships near Venezuela in what is the latest move in an escalation of the aggression against the Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro. According to Defense Secretary Mark Esper, the mission involves sending additional Navy ships, surveillance aircraft and special forces teams to nearly double the US counter-narcotics capacity in the Western Hemisphere, with forces operating both in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. Esper said the mission would be supported by 22 partner nations. The move comes after the indictment by the US Justice Department last week of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and other high-ranking officials accused of narco-terrorism, drug trafficking and money laundering. The Trump administration is ramping up its pressure against Venezuela in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, with the State Department issuing a plan for a transitional government in the country on Tuesday. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez read out a statement by the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela condemning the recent statements by US President Donald Trump, his Defense Secretary and Attorney General regarding supposed drug trafficking by Venezuelan officials.
Beyond the aggression of the lies spouted against officials of the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, we welcome the fact that for the first time in decades, the United States authorities are taking measures to guard its borders, historically impermeable, neglected and vulnerable, faced with the thousands of tons of drugs that enter the country each year from the drug industry that has been developed in the territory of its ally and close partner, Colombia.
And Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza denounced on Wednesday that the so-called Democratic Transition Framework for Venezuela, presented by the US State Department on Tuesday, includes political instructions from Washington to other countries. Arreaza pointed to one of the points of the State Department's framework on his Twitter account, which refers to a 2018 letter sent to the International Criminal Court to denounce President of Venezuela Nicolas Maduro for crimes allegedly committed by the state during the 2017 anti-government protests. The letter was sent by the then governments of Argentina, Canada, Colombia, Chile, Paraguay and Peru. In what points to acknowledgement by Washington that these governments submit to its orders, the State Department notes that should the demands outlined in its framework for a transitional government in Venezuela be met, these countries would withdraw their support for the International Criminal Court referral against Maduro. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications, Culture and Tourism, Jorge Rodriguez, offered an update on the meeting of the Presidential Commission overseeing the efforts to combat the COVID-19 virus in the country. Rodriguez noted that a meeting was held with Chinese experts who arrived in Venezuela together with a shipment of medical supplies to combat the coronavirus. He also announced a further confirmed COVID-19 case, bringing a total to 144. So far, 43 people have recovered from the virus in Venezuela, while 3 people have lost their lives. The Venezuelan official called on young people to take extra care, as the majority of cases confirmed in the country are of young people, in contrast to other nations. The Cuban government has implemented over 200 measures as part of its plan to control the novel coronavirus epidemic in the country. The Ministers of Public Health, Transport and Communications offered an update on the implementation of the new provisions, which include the request for all foreign vessels to leave Cuban territorial waters, the suspension of the arrival of all aircraft to the country, except for humanitarian aid, missions and trade, and the cancellation of the annual May Day March. Mobile and landline phone costs will also be reduced to help Cubans stay in contact. The Ministry of Public Health expressed that understanding of how the pandemic is developing across the world and in Cuba itself is required to ensure risk perception.
Nadie debe alarmarse. Primero con las medidas que ha tomado el país. Yo creo que
And meanwhile, the US blockade against Cuba prevented the country from receiving a plane carrying medical supplies and aid from China on Tuesday. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel Bermúdez announced on his Twitter account that Cuba was prevented from receiving the donation of medical supplies to fight the COVID-19 virus from the Chinese Alibaba Foundation due to the regulations of the criminal United States blockade against the island. The aid was sent by Chinese entrepreneur and philanthropist Jack Ma and included a donation of masks, rapid diagnostic kits and ventilators intended for COVID-19 patients and Cuban medical staff. The Chinese businessman has sent aid to 24 Latin American countries, including Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, the Dominican Republic and Peru. Díaz-Canel described the event as an attack against the human rights of the Cuban people. The restriction comes after US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed on Tuesday that US sanctions on sovereign nations do not affect the supply of medicines or food. In Ecuador, social organizations from the province of Guayas have condemned the concealment of the real number of victims of the novel coronavirus. At the same time, they have called on the WHO and the international community to undertake inspections and provide aid. On Wednesday, Ecuador reported over 2,700 positive COVID-19 cases and 93 deaths. Guayas is home to around 70% of the COVID-19 infections registered by the government of Lenin Moreno, which states that Guayas has seen 51 deaths and over 1,500 positive cases of the novel coronavirus. The coordinator of social movements in Guayas state denounced that the government has no interest in investigating the real number of fatalities. Meanwhile, social movements and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights are keeping a record that depicts the tragedy that this Ecuadorian state is experiencing. And in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic in Ecuador, Minister of Government Paola Romo admitted on Tuesday that collection of victims' bodies has become difficult. According to her estimation, 100 bodies were collected between March 24th and 26th alone. This number appears to differ from the official data offered by the Lenin Moreno government. This Wednesday, a first batch of COVID-19 testing kits arrived in Brazil, where more than 6,000 cases and over 200 fatalities have been confirmed. The test kits were purchased from a Chinese company by a private Brazilian firm. The Vale mining company was also involved in the transaction. The first shipment contains 500,000 rapid test kits, offering results in just 15 minutes. A total of 5 million tests have been purchased. The initiative came in the midst of the lack of response to the pandemic from the Jair Bolsonaro government, which has been widely criticised for its handling of the crisis. The government of Mexico has reinforced measures to counter the spread of the novel coronavirus and declared a national health emergency. Until April 30th, non-essential activities in the public, private and social sectors are suspended. Mexico has confirmed 28 COVID-19 deaths since February 27th, when the first fatality linked to the disease was detected. From Mexico City, our correspondent Isa Garcia has the latest.
Ricardo spends most of his day in the traffic lights on Axis 7 of Mexico City. He has learned the art of juggling and entertaining. He's one of the 70 million Mexicans without a fixed income. He's aware of how the coronavirus spreads, but he says that the need to make money is bigger than any other reason.
Actually, it is a danger to be on the street, but still we take the risk, because the situation is very difficult and you have to make a living where you can.
Another one who resists to leave the street is Andres. Selling hammocks is not very profitable, but without this job, he could not bring food home.
I cannot stay at home waiting. They say we must be in quarantine, but I really do not have the money to stay home.
Staying at home has been the main recommendation from the government as a way to prevent the fast spreading of the novel coronavirus in the country. On Monday, the government announced more restrictive measures.
Non-essential activities in public and private sectors will remain suspended from March 30 through April. If we don't implement these measures, the economic damage will be worse. The impact on the employment and on the economic activity will be deeper. It is better to act now for health reasons, but also for the economy. The more effective the quarantine is this month, the sooner we will return to normality.
Más pronto regresaremos a la normalidad.
Nobody is unaware of the danger of the coronavirus, but the reality is that many people decide not to leave their usual jobs.
I have to work because I have to keep going. I have people working with me and they need their money, don't they? They pay rent, you have to eat, you have to bring food to your home. It's your need, and if you don't come to work in a week, who is going to help you?
The government has promised to support informal workers with a credit of $300 with a 0% interest. They have also requested the private sector to guarantee the wages of workers until the end of the sanitary emergency period.
More stories coming up after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back. The US Defense Secretary has refused to evacuate a US aircraft carrier with 5,000 people on board exposed to the COVID-19 virus. The captain of the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, which has an unconfirmed number of people on board who have tested positive for COVID-19, has called for help to save the lives of his sailors. The carrier was in the Pacific when the Navy reported its first coronavirus case a week ago. It has since pulled into port in Guam, a US territory in the Western Pacific. A 4-page letter written by the ship's captain describes a bleak situation on board due to a lack of enough quarantine and isolation facilities and calls for decisive action and the evacuation of over 4,000 sailors from the ship to avoid further cases and fatalities. The New York Police Department has been badly hit by the coronavirus outbreak, with more than 1,400 of its members testing positive for COVID-19. The shocking statistics were reported on Wednesday morning after NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shear confirmed that 5 members of the nation's largest police force have now died from the disease. On Wednesday, 17% of the department's uniformed force were reported sick. Meanwhile, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis issued a stay-at-home order for the entire state on Wednesday to slow the spread of the coronavirus after weeks of refusing to take bold measures. Florida has reported more than 5,000 positive cases. The novel coronavirus has caused over 43,000 deaths and infected more than 900,000 people worldwide. The coronavirus pandemic has claimed more than 30,000 lives in Europe alone, in what the head of the United Nations has described as humanity's worst crisis since World War II. Spain has crossed the threshold of 100,000 confirmed coronavirus cases, health officials reported on Wednesday, while the country's number of fatalities has passed 9,000. Italy and Spain have borne the brunt of the crisis, accounting for 3 in every 4 deaths on the continent. Spain's death toll is only surpassed by Italy's, where the virus has killed over 12,000. Half of the planet's population is already under some form of lockdown in a battle to halt the spread of the virus. More than 160 elderly people living in nursing homes have been killed by COVID-19 in Catalonia. The president of the Catalan Association of Directors of Gerontological Unit Care Services, Andres Reda, has assured that the number of deaths from the coronavirus in nursing homes is at least 50% more than the official number. Reda claimed that the real number is around 250, as many elderly people are not being tested. The same could be the case in Germany and Belgium, where the elderly are told not to go to hospitals but to stay in their own homes. The UK has recorded its biggest daily rise in the number of COVID-19 deaths so far, taking the death toll to over 2,300 on Wednesday. The Department of Health and Social Care said that the UK has reported almost 30,000 positive COVID-19 cases. The latest figures come amid accusations that the UK government is failing to ramp up coronavirus testing quickly enough for frontline healthcare workers in particular, as well as the wider community. The government has set a target of carrying out 25,000 tests a day by the end of April. Meanwhile, 4 cabinet members have self-isolated after showing symptoms, as concerns rise that ministers had not been following their own rules on physical distancing. The Russian government this Wednesday sent a plane carrying humanitarian aid to the United States to combat the COVID-19 crisis. The shipment of medical supplies on a military transport plane was organised by the Russian Defense Ministry following a phone call between President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The humanitarian aid includes COVID-19 rapid test kits and masks, while a Russian team of experts was also deployed to help treat coronavirus patients. The move demonstrated Moscow's solidarity despite the ongoing US sanctions imposed against Russia. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said on Wednesday he expected the amount of confirmed novel coronavirus cases around the world to reach 1 million in the next few days. He also forecast that global death toll would rise to 50,000. During a video conference from Geneva, he recalled that over the past 5 weeks, there has been a near exponential growth in the number of new cases, reaching almost every country.
Many countries are asking people to stay at home and shutting down population movement, which can help to limit transmission of the virus, but can have unintended consequences for the poorest and most vulnerable people. I have called on governments to put in place social welfare measures to ensure vulnerable people have food and other life essentials during this crisis.
And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back. There are now over 5,800 confirmed novel coronavirus cases across the African continent. A number of African nations have already imposed a range of prevention measures against the spread of the pandemic. According to the latest data from the Africa Centers for Disease Control, there has been a rise in cases and only a handful of countries are still holding out. So far, 201 deaths have been reported and over 430 patients have recovered. In total, 49 countries have reported cases and only 5 remain virus-free: Sao Tome and Principe, Malawi, Comoros, Lesotho and South Sudan. Burundi has confirmed its first 2 cases of the novel coronavirus. According to the Health Ministry, both cases are people who recently returned from abroad.
The first patient of Burundian nationality, aged 56, residing in Bujumbura, returned from Rwanda. He was hospitalized and presented a symptomatology in the form of a simple flu from March 18, 2020. The second patient, also of Burundian nationality, aged 42, resident in Bujumbura, returned from Dubai via Rwanda. The results of the test carried out by the National Institute of Public Health were positive for both patients.
Incursions by Israeli security forces continue in Palestinian cities despite the health crisis caused by the COVID-19 virus. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shadeh stated that the main obstacle for Palestinians to fight the coronavirus is the Israeli occupation and not the pandemic itself. His statements came after 15 Palestinian COVID-19 cases were confirmed in an Israeli factory. So far, 134 COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Palestine. And we finish this news brief with images of Chinese medical workers returning home and being reunited with their loved ones after having been deployed to Hubei province to tackle the COVID-19 virus. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.
手中的平凡。